is being recorded.
Great. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting on updates to downtown draft zoning and amendments to Plan Downtown. I will start things off by handing things over to our Chief of Planning, Kairos Shen, to kick things off.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening. I want to introduce myself. I'm Kairos Shen. I'm the Chief of Planning, and many of you know that I started in October of 2024. So today is the 3-month anniversary for me assuming this position. So I wanted to actually introduce myself because I want to tell you how important this work has been for our planning department, and that it's been a top priority for me to actually work with the many staff that have been working on this project for many years, and to actually get us to the point that where we are today. I know many of you have invested many hours and years into this plan, and I feel like we are at a point where we have brought together many of the ideas and that have been shared, and there are certainly a diversity of opinion as we have been discovering throughout this process. But I want to remind all of you what the objective of what we're doing here. So as many of you know, the Plan Downtown started actually back, now probably over 6-7 years ago. And it's really about sort of addressing how we grow the downtown and actually manage change in the downtown. The urgency of this addressing these changes were even further elevated with the pandemic, which has had some fairly great impacts on how the downtown has transformed. But in the end, I think there's broad agreements on the principles. So first and foremost is a recognition that the downtown should be a mixed-use neighborhood instead of a single-use financial district. And there are many parts of downtown that already have a kind of dense mixed-use kind of development that has been an integral component of downtown for many years. There's a recognition, of course, that we should have more housing so that people can live in the place that has the most transit capacity. I think there's a recognition that the downtown has a diverse set of characters, including critical areas that have very intact historic fabric that are unique to our downtown. And then, of course, the economic vibrancy of the public realm is something that I know that we all want to reinforce and extend, and how to connect all of these different kinds of sub-neighborhoods and so on are a part of this sort of the aspirations of this plan. And then finally, of course, something that is critical is the overall resiliency, and whatever we do should actually anticipate a more sustainable and resilient neighborhood in our downtown core. Now, these are the goals that I think are clearly articulated and have broad agreement that we achieved through the Plan Downtown process. We have been embarking on for now over 1.5 years of trying to actually codify these principles in a set of, or by rezoning this district or this downtown area. Much of the downtown zoning today is really, primarily written in the 1970s. So, and this is so that it was written at a different time with different needs and different aspirations for the downtown. So I think what we have tried to do, and in this current draft that you're going to see tonight and hear from our staff, brings together many of these different opinions and feedback that we've seen. The goal of this zoning, first and foremost, is so that with the new zoning, we can promote the goals that I've just listed before, but by encouraging investment, because much of our aspiration for the downtown cannot happen without sort of private investment. The second thing is that we need to also have these rules not just promote new development and new investment, but also reinvestment in some of the historic fabric that is critical to the character of this area. So the idea that whatever, as we streamline the new regulations, that there is as much encouragement for owners of existing buildings, historic buildings, to reinvest in their buildings. And then I would say also that you will see components of our zoning recommendation that is promoting innovative ideas, development projects that would promote a transformation of the downtown. So I hope that you will see some of these elements in the presentation tonight. As I've said, I want to emphasize that I know that there's a lot of passion that all of you bring to this work that we've been doing. I know that that passion can be that there have been forums where we have debated our difference of opinion with a lot of passion too. I actually have already read some of the letters that we've received regarding this particular draft. And I know that many of you want to actually extend the comment period. However, you will see that we plan to go to the BPDA board for approving this zoning draft next month. And it is my belief that the current draft is a document that addresses most of the comments in the most, let's just say, with compromises here and there, that we think is a very fair representation of what we think will be a good and solid new zoning that will promote the goals that I first talked about. So I hope that you agree with me at the end of this presentation. As you know, that we still have an opportunity for you to continue to share your comments with us in the next few weeks. I want to take this opportunity to say that, I've already said that I'm Johnny come lately to this process, but many of you know that I have a long history in the city. I have invested much of my professional career in an earlier time, helping the city and the downtown grow at a different time. But I also want to make sure that I thank the staff that have been working really hard on this. And so Andrew has been working and leading this project and will be leading the presentation tonight. And the other two people I want to call out, although there are many other staff that have been involved, is Kathleen Onifer and also Amy Chambers. So with that, I'll pass it on to Andrew to give the presentation. I want all of you to know that I'm staying on this evening to make sure that I hear your comments. And thank you for attending. And I hope to see many of you in person very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Kairos. So with that, we'll dive in. And as Kairos said, we really want to take this opportunity to provide a breakdown of the draft zoning, especially as it relates to the draft that was released last April. And so what we want to focus on is really, one, the feedback and comments we received on that draft, and some of the key critical themes we're trying to address in the new draft, which Kairos also touched on. So the latest zoning and plan updates are based on the feedback we received on the draft released on April 9th of 2024. And obviously, this process also builds on the Plan Downtown initiative that lasted from 2018 to 2023. And so some of the key themes and some of the key feedback we received on the April draft of last year emphasized the importance of historic preservation downtown, the sensitivity of key historic areas and fabric, and also the need to support more housing growth in our urban center. A majority of comments focus specifically on the 1121 Bromfield site in opposition to the height proposed by that district. But taking all these comments into consideration and also trying to move away from pointed comments on individual sites, the updates to the zoning and the plan take a more comprehensive look and approach to critical corridors downtown. Key corridors like Washington Street that can really support critical housing growth for the city. The proposed changes also include additional methods and regulations that prioritize adaptive reuse and preservation of facades alongside that residential growth. And lastly, updates will also help support downtown's role as an office and entertainment district and destination, while also maintaining the functionality of linkage. So feedback on the sensitivity of historic areas downtown and the prioritization of housing growth really reinforced the need to look at the overlap between growth and preservation goals downtown. And that overlap really being centered along the Washington Street corridor, it being a key spine to downtown. As a major gateway to transit services, it's a significant area to support housing growth. At the same time, as an edge to significant historic buildings and facades, it's also a critical area to prioritize adaptive reuse of historic buildings and retain some of these significant historic facade structures. Plan Downtown originally proposed two types of framework areas: enhance areas to affirm existing historic fabric, and growth areas to encourage large-scale mixed-use development. It became clear through the zoning process that there's a need for an additional type of zone concentrated along key corridors, focused on housing growth alongside adaptive reuse. This housing-focused growth area stretches predominantly along the west side of Washington Street, previously identified as enhanced areas, and north portions of Stewart Street, previously identified as growth areas. But overall, this growth area with a housing focus is meant to reinforce the spine of Washington Street as well as Stewart Street, where there's key access points to transit, while recognizing the sensitivity of some of the historic fabric there. The new growth area forms an additional transition zone between existing taller areas of downtown and lower scale historic areas closer to the Common and Public Garden. Along Washington Street, it includes medium scale existing residential buildings such as 45 Province to the north at 350 feet and Ritz-Carlton residential towers at 400 feet towards the south. This transition in height is reinforced by state shadow regulations that limit shadows on the Common and Public Garden, so that parcels closer to the Common must be lower in height, and where some sites might be able to reach 500 feet along Washington Street at the north and south ends, many sites in between may only exceed, are limited to heights such as 350 or 400, depending on the site. So this approach in envisioning a growth area with a housing focus informed the creation of a new skyline district, Sky R. The district is distinguished by areas of high mixed use activity with sensitive historic resources, and it's really regulated to incentivize large scale residential development while also advancing historic preservation. The height of the district is the same as Sky Low at 155 feet, but allows up to 500 feet or the limit of state shadow regulations, whichever is lower, for predominantly residential uses. When mapped, Sky R forms a zone that in many ways mediates between Sky Low and Sky along the west edge of Washington Street and north edge of Stewart Street. Overall, the updates to the April 2024 proposed map introduces Sky R by moving previous Sky as well as Sky Low areas into the new district. The latest map also updates the adult entertainment district boundary. The updated map enlarges Sky Low, so it expands Sky Low along the edges of the common and public garden. And this is to really reinforce the historic fabric and smaller scale fabric along those edges that were previously in the Sky District. So example of some of those key sites includes Sears Crescent, as well as Piano Row at the Boylston and Tremont intersection. The update also moves Sky Low areas directly adjacent on the west side of Washington Street into the newly created Sky R. And this is to enable potential taller residential growth on parcels directly adjacent to the key corridor. This also makes sites like 45 Province, a 350-foot residential tower, compliant with the proposed zoning. One other change is moving the Milk and Water Street block that has established designated landmark sites, as well as established commercial building on site to the Sky District. One other key element to highlight is that some areas that were previously in the Sky District are moved into Sky R. These previously Sky sites include sites like 600 Washington Street, 1121 Briarfield site, and towers like the Ritz-Carlton and Kensington. In the previous draft, these sites had height limits up to state shadow regulations and a Logan critical airspace limit. And those heights could reach up to 700 feet in some locations. The Sky District in these sites also included conditional uses like research lab. So in Sky R, those height limits are reduced, 155 feet for projects that are not predominantly residential, 500 feet for projects that are, and research labs are forbidden in these areas. The last map change adjusts the boundary of the adult entertainment districts. The existing boundary is misaligned with parcel lines and covers an area of the Chinatown neighborhood district where there are no adult entertainment uses. So the update removes the district from Chinatown and for clarity aligns the boundary with parcels that are within the overlap with the existing district. So I'll now break down a little bit more the use and form regulations that defines Sky R, and also distinguish it a little bit from the districts that we've introduced already, the Sky Low and Sky districts. So the district's use regulations help encourage mixed use activity along commercial corridors while also being sensitive to the potential impact of uses on the public realm, the historic fabric, and pedestrian environment. So uses like large retail, extra large entertainment, and light manufacturing are conditional and require a review to ensure projects enhance historic preservation on site. All these uses are also limited in height if the project is less than 60% GFA residential use. And again, in Sky R, residential research laboratory, a very high impact use is forbidden in the district. When it comes to dimensional regulations, building and lot standards ensure new residential development enhances the public realm, and tall buildings also respect the surrounding historic context. Sky R includes many form regulations already applied to Sky. So these include ground floor active use requirement, a limit on blank wall of facade, and lower building lot coverage for larger sites. New regulations for Sky and SkyR include a max building facade length. And SkyR also includes new regulations specific to the district, really meant to address contextuality, ensuring that projects respond to the given historic scale. So some of the form regulations specific to SkyR, one include its height limit set to encourage residential projects. There's also a step back minimum requirement on all frontages to ensure tall buildings minimize impacts on the public realm, such as excessive wind, but also ensure that those step backs help relate to surrounding and adjacent context, also help feature historic facades. Max building floor plate and building length ensure tall buildings maintain smaller upper floors. Average building floor plates encourage projects to provide additional step backs on upper stories. And ultimately, the image shown here is a really basic potential maximum building envelope for what would be a predominantly residential project that could reach 500 feet as long as state shadow limits allow. But I think it's important to recognize that Article 80 review and new site-specific design guidelines that we're providing in this update would really further restrict and refine the massing to ensure that it responds appropriately to its given context. So with that, we'll now kind of shift focus as well to concentrate on some of those guidelines as well as new regulations that try and help prioritize adaptive reuse and preservation of historic facades in the area. So one key new provision is the creation of really a type of incentive to reuse existing buildings rather than resort to new ground up construction. So the proposed zoning introduces overall many new dimensional regulations to downtown that didn't exist before, things like lot coverage, smaller lot coverage requirements, step backs, yard requirements. And those would be applied to new development. But there are many older sites throughout the downtown that do not conform to those new regulations. So this zoning update ensures that these sites that do not conform, many of these often historic larger buildings, can still be enlarged or altered as long as the dimensional nonconformity is not increased and the addition conforms to zoning requirements. So this really creates an incentive to take advantage of existing buildings rather than to adhere to new stricter dimensional standards that would be applied to a new project or a new ground up project. So while this provision encourages building retention, these dimensional standards are flexible enough for additions that can make often what are difficult adaptive reuse and historic facade preservation more feasible and more viable projects. I'll now hand things over to Alexa to speak a little bit about the new design guidelines.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alexa Pinard on the urban design staff at the planning department. The design guidelines have been updated again to emphasize our priority on adaptive reuse, as Andrew mentioned, and the retention of historic buildings. The design guidelines are a key component to, or a key accompaniment, I guess you could say, to the zoning, which is already doing a lot, I think, to recognize some of our historic buildings. So in July, a chapter was added to the design guidelines to include historic context guidelines, which went into much more detail about each character area. It included very specific area-specific guidelines for projects in each character area downtown. I also want to make sure that we thank our colleagues at the Office of Historic Preservation and the Boston Landmark Commission, who both pushed us to make these guidelines more robust and helped us draft some of these guidelines. One addition that I'm really excited about is the guideline for a context analysis, which is something that we sort of ask for when we do development review and design review anyway, but to have it written down in guidelines is really exciting. It gives guidance on how to do research, how to find information about historic buildings, what kind of analyses to do, what kind of drawings to provide, and that will all be done in concert both with planning department staff and Boston Landmark Commission staff. And then finally, the design guidelines also have been beefed up a bit to include more guidance on the design of tall buildings. That's the next slide. Thanks. So for example, the minimum separation between tall buildings has been increased to 60 feet. This is for tall buildings on the same block. And of course, as we all know, tall buildings have an impact from a great distance, and they can have an impact when someone is standing right next to one. So step backs, materials, view corridors, of course, are all very important, the retention of light and air, but also how do these groupings of towers impact wind and comfort at the sidewalk level. So I'll wrap it up here. I hope you'll dig into the design guidelines. As I said, I think they're a very, very crucial inclusion to this update. And I think they're more robust than almost any design guidelines I've worked on so far. So happy to be here tonight. And I'll pass it over to Kathleen.
So one of the key components that we received feedback on in the previous draft was work that we'd done on ensuring that the linkage system works for large-scale commercial development downtown, while making sure that we're embracing downtown's role as an office and entertainment destination, particularly in the core of the financial district. Next slide, please. We spent significant time over the course of the last few months, including time spent with our legal team on legal research, to be able to have a new strategy to ensure that linkage continues to function and no longer requires zoning relief through a conditional use permit in downtown, so that office uses and large entertainment uses in the core of that Sky District can be functioning as allowed uses, really befitting their presence there today. That's particularly important because making changes to a conditional use, even if those changes themselves are small and wouldn't trigger linkage themselves, is something that would trigger additional review for zoning relief and help prevent investment in some of these core uses downtown and re-tenanting of existing buildings, particularly existing office buildings. So in our draft, we've proposed to adjust Article 80 thresholds in the downtown districts to help ensure that projects that are establishing the scale of use go through the Article 80 process and will administer linkage through the Article 80 process. I want to note that other uses that are part of linkage, so research labs as well as hotels, stay conditional uses in the Skyline districts. Large hotels would continue to be limited to only 155 feet in the Sky R district. And in both districts, research labs would stay conditional, because we believe they require evaluation of site-specific impacts at any given site in downtown, particularly related to loading and pickup drop-off activity that may impact pedestrian-first environment in downtown and is likely not appropriate for every site within downtown. So maintaining those as conditional uses will allow us to weigh in on the appropriateness of the use for the given site and for the Board of Appeal to have a process to grant that conditional use permit if appropriate. Next slide, please.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. So this just brings us to next steps, and want to leave plenty of time for questions and comments, since I know this was a lot to cover, and happy to kind of flip back into slides as needed. But again, the materials are on the Plan Downtown website, and that includes the draft amendments to Plan Downtown. So that includes the update to the design guidelines, and then the updates to the downtown zoning text amendments, including also the changes to the draft map. Again, the public comment period goes until February 4th. With that, I'd like to open things up to questions. Also, please continue to write questions in the chat, and we'll try and respond to those as best we can. I do want to try and limit comments to 2 minutes right now, since just looking at the number of people we have, and if we have more time, we can circle back to folks as well. I will close the screen for now, and we can always hop back. Great. So we'll start with Anthony. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Andrew. As some of you know, I've been looking at this plan for a long time. I speak to you today as the chairman of the board of the One Charles Condominium Association, which is newly affected by this new version of the plan. And I would start by saying this brand new version of the Plan Downtown is very aggressive in the ladder blocks and about height. This plan will forever change downtown as we know it. It vastly enlarges the Tower District. The Sky Arzo zone is a Tower District and has impacts that are not really understood by any of us, and I think probably not entirely by the staff either. From my point of view, there's no real planning here. This is a development.
I'm on a Zoom call here. There.
I beg your pardon? I'm sorry. There's no real planning here. I think it's a development scheme that inflates land value and deflates the value of existing buildings. And that's a not misunderstood concept. If you upzone portions of a building lot or a building site, you decrease the value of the building on that site, particularly with zoning of this rapid increase. It's more than 3 times the height allowed on an existing site at 155 feet. So my concern is that you don't really understand, nor have you explained to us, how splitting city blocks into high and low portions within the same block, within the ladder district, encourages redevelopment of the older buildings, because you can reap much higher value and profit by building a new one. So what I'd say to you, just by way of standing back from it a little bit, is that there's really none of the requisite analysis that planning competence requires for a change of this magnitude. And Kairos knows exactly what I'm talking about. Even in the Logue days at the BPDA, BRA in its time, there were examples of what the plan meant. There were rudimentary urban design diagrams. They were done by people like Kevin Lynch that showed us what the plan really meant. We have no illustration of what this means. A rough cross-section that suggests stepping down to the park is a good way to build. But indeed, what we're talking about here is a plan that builds things that are very foreign to this neighborhood. We're building things that are unknown in this plan. So I think what really should be done, if you're to be fair to all of us and not just give us 3 weeks to evaluate a plan that will last 20 or 30 years, is you should model this. You should model the urban design result. You should tell us and analyze the economic consequence. What does a disparate increase in land value to owners and developers mean to existing buildings? What's the traffic impact? Can the downtown take this kind of density? Where does it go? How does one get there? In short, there's a missing piece here, I think, that you should take very seriously if you expect us to respect your work, because it's a level of competence required for this kind of planning. You need to do an environmental analysis that tells us what all of this means and show us alternatives. Is this the only way to improve downtown? Is this the only way to get new housing? Do we have to build towers instead of neighborhoods? I don't think you're giving us a fair shake here, particularly after a 6-year process where nothing of this kind, except on 2 isolated sites, was ever contemplated. This is not fair. So what I think you're doing, guys, is just making forms. It's not planning. It just makes towers, not neighborhoods. And it's totally unreasonable. I really mean this sincerely, to give people 3 weeks before you take comments and then rush to the new board and say, this is it. Guys, it's just not done that way in Boston. And I've lived here a long time. We've stopped some highways. We can stop some high rises. Please don't do this in this rushed, arrogant way. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll act.
Well, thanks for your comment. I think I want to just, emphasize the way in which this has been a part of, a long multi-year process that has built up over time. And that this latest draft really, elements of it does represent a downzoning from some of the districts that were proposed earlier. And I think what we're trying to depict through some of the, the map changes that we went through earlier is the way in which we're trying to identify, key sites along key corridors that we need critical housing downtown. And that includes buildings with height, given, the opportunity for that in our urban core, while understanding that as part of Article 80 review, one, we can enforce the design guidelines that we're bolstering and enhancing with historic context, but also evaluate elements like impact to transportation and public realm and environmental impacts to elements like wind. So I want to make sure, folks take all those points into consideration, but also want to leave time to hear more comments. So thank you so much. Good list of people. Kim, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. You can hear me, right, Andrew? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been actively involved in Plan Downtown for 6 years since its inception. Attended all of the meetings, also attended most of the AG meetings. I think the most important comment that I want to make tonight is that this plan that's been rolled out now completely disrespects that 6-year process. And I know that I speak for many, many people on the call when I say that. That was a process that resulted in a consensus from constituencies that included an AG advisory group that had diverse representation on it, from the public process and from the stakeholder process. And there was a consensus view that came out of all of those various groups that 3 character areas would be protected at existing height, which was the ladder blocks, Chinatown, and the Wharf District, where there were historic fabric that we wanted to respect and maintain and protect. That was the consensus almost unanimously, with the exception of some developers that were on the other side of the coin. So there was, at the ending of that process last summer, there was one zone that was a spot zone. It was a very small, it really came down in the end to one parcel by one developer, and it was a spot zone. That was highly controversial, and the public comment was overwhelmingly, almost unanimously against it. And that spot has now spread like wildfire all the way down Washington Street to Park Plaza. So that change that has now taken place for 500, capacity to go up to 500 feet down Washington Street along that historic fabric is the opposite of everything the public and the advisory group advised over this 6-year period. And this represents one individual coming into the role today, or well, not today, but a few months ago, replacing his view with a bias towards tall buildings for the viewpoint of all of the public that and advisory group and members and constituencies and stakeholders that weighed in to this point. I think that's a complete disenfranchisement of the public. And the mayor was clear that she was going to foster a development and planning environment that favored public planning and not developer-oriented planning. So I want to echo Anthony's comments on timing and giving us adequate time to digest, respond, and evaluate. And then I want to make one final comment that I think in zoning, consistency and predictability is so important. And I think we were starting to get there after 6 years where the plan had galvanized around holding the historic district height to 155. And we were starting to see actual development of these historic structures to convert them to housing, which is our goal. That's the goal as has been stated by everyone. And we were starting to see that. So if we thought more inventively, we could think of this as Soho and see these historic buildings become residential buildings. There's 2 projects currently on Bromfield Street, which is one of the most in-need streets. And that's 44 Bromfield turning into condos, and at the top of the street, a dorm. And that's a lot of residential activation that has taken place, in my opinion, because the height was held. It seemed clear that's where it was going to be held. And now we've introduced chaos. So now developers are going to continue to sit on parcels and not develop it because they're going to wait for height. And we're going to end up reversing all of the progress we've made over these 6 years to encourage these buildings to be restored and turned into residential housing that's affordable as opposed to high-rise luxury housing. So I'm really disappointed, and I know I speak for many, and that we're so disappointed in how the public process has been disrespected. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I want to take a moment to just bring up the map as well, to reiterate some of the changes for clarity. Hold on. Okay, great. I just wanted to clarify some of the comparison between what was proposed as part of the draft last year, in which we had these 2 zones, Sky and Sky Low. Again, Sky, the height limit could go all the way up to FAA or state shadow law regulations. FAA being critical airspace limit. In some of those locations, reaching up to 700 feet, as you get closer to the common, that reduces. The change that we're introducing here is one, comprehensively recognizing this key spine downtown along, access to major transit. But it also represents a downzoning in some areas from the previous scheme. So in particular, looking at sites, including at like the Washington Essex intersection, and then along Stewart, these represent actually a downzoning from what was proposed. The key change in terms of what's being additional height that's being allowed is this stretch here along Washington Street. And this really recognizes the fact that these are lower historic buildings with significant historic facades. And that's why these design guidelines in place will, really need to be enforced through review alongside the form standards within Sky R that insist on step backs that relate to adjacent sites. And one key element here is also looking for consistency with existing built fabric. So something like the 45 Province residential tower, which is within this zone, will become zoning compliant. So I want to really emphasize, the comparison between these two and really trying to develop a zone that mediates between these low and high areas, but also recognize the fact that this is a key area for housing growth. And it's a opportunity for creating additional housing options. There is an opportunity for height to achieve additional density, but within a transition zone between low and high. And that's what this district really represents. So in terms of the key changes, I think we're speaking to really this zone as the area that's increasing in height versus what was compared before, versus this zone, which represents a decrease from last year. But you're sick of me talking, so Beatrice, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. And since I've been called upon, I have a bunch of questions, and so I'll just go through them, and I'll try to be slow so that you can answer them, or someone on the staff can answer them. So I was a little confused about what's the difference between historic overlay and the Midtown shadow overlay, which is shown on the zoning map, whereas the historic overlay district is not shown. That's one question. Second question is, are there criteria for a 500-foot building in the Sky R other than it being residential? How are you going to evaluate those proposals? In that regard, and I applaud the effort to respect and enhance historic areas, but when you talk about reuse for historic buildings in that area of Washington Street that you just outlined, are we talking about encouraging facadism as historic preservation as opposed to protecting the buildings themselves? That stretch of Washington Street has a wonderful line of uniformity of facades and buildings, and I'd be curious whether you're just thinking about facadism or whether you're really thinking about preserving or reusing those buildings. And another question has to do with your agency, and the Parks Department is involved in a very thorough shadow study of shadows on the Emerald Necklace, the Fenway area. And my question is whether any of the impacts or the results of that study are being considered in terms of impacts of shadows on the common. That study indicates that certain species can tolerate more shadow than others. Buildings, shadows never change. So once they're built, and we all know that edge of the common is already burdened. Along Tremont Street and Boylston Street is heavily shadowed throughout the year. And so I'd like to know whether you're taking into consideration the not only increasing those shadows that will result from the new zoning, but also whether the horticultural conditions that are being discussed are being considered here. Thank you very much.
Great. Beatrice, I wrote these down, and I'm going to go in the same order that you asked them, but try and group. So the first is that the Sky Low district, right, and the overlay that it has is a dimensional overlay that's meant to reflect the predominant dimensions of buildings in that area. In downtown, the dimensions of buildings in the Wharf District area and in the ladder blocks area of Sky Low are close enough that those are not different dimensional overlays. But we could see in the future in other places that these districts may be applied across the future that we would need to differentiate. A district that from a use perspective and many perspectives operates the same, but has some component of building dimension based on historic buildings that's different. That's how we would be able to refine and make sure that that was really placed and targeted at those historic buildings. The second thing you asked was about the Midtown shadow overlay. And so there are 2 state laws that apply to shadows cast onto the common. We are preserving the function of both of those. You know, one, we don't have those state laws supersede all of, right. And I want to sort of be unequivocal about that. Those state law, we are writing this zoning to reference those laws because we fully respect the way that the state law supersedes. And we want to make sure that anyone who looks at this zoning also goes and looks at the state law and fully models, right, all of their work under the state law. So that overlay is to make sure that it's very clear from a map perspective which state law applies to which area by memorializing the area that was the Midtown District in 1996 when that state law was passed originally. I think one of the next questions you asked was about how projects would be reviewed or changed. And I think this is true for all components of a project, including its shadow impacts, including, I know we had questions up the chat, any impacts it has on traffic, any impacts that it has on the streetscape and the environment of an area is through Article 80 review. And one of the key moves that we've made right as part of this effort in both to support the preservation of linkage is we're lowering the threshold for Article 80 review in downtown to better align with the scale of project that we think needs to analyze those impacts and be able to present and mitigate on them. There are locations in downtown where we think sort of facadism and facadectomy projects have been successful. I think we've all also seen, whether in Boston and other cities, places where facadectomies have been unsuccessful. And we've also seen places where additions have been really successful. The building on Post Office Square, one of my favorites in terms of a really exciting addition combined with preservation. So the goal in writing this zoning was to make sure that we're creating a pathway for all of those types of projects so that through the Article 80 process, we're able to evaluate the impacts of any specific project and the best way to preserve those specific resources. I think that captures all of them, but if I miss something, let me know.
Thank you very much. So I do want to thank you, and I'm aware that you're relying on Article 80. And as you probably know, the Friends of the Public Garden has been in discussion about our sunshine model, which could be used at the beginning of any development process to model whether a building will cast new shadows, whether they conform to the law or not. And it would allow the developer early on to adjust a design to minimize those impacts. So we hope that the planning department will take seriously the benefits that model can bestow upon the new draft or any zoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice. Tony, please go ahead.
Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, Chief Shen, thanks for joining this call and being willing to hear from the community. So I've served on the advisory group for the entire process over 6 years now. I would like to acknowledge the step back provisions that you built in and that nod to housing preference that I think we as the community had to push hard on to get instituted, and the hard work of the staff over many meetings and many years. Unfortunately, I think that's all overshadowed by the latest revisions that you've made here, which rolls back 6 years of consensus building around historic character with the Sky R zone. It's an overreach. It shows a lack of respect for the years of work that the advisory group has voluntarily put in to help drive a balanced income, a lack of respect for the community at large that's been really vocal with its feedback, and a lack of respect for the unique historic character, which you all referenced in this call. And And I'll remind you that in your own commission study that was produced in January of 23, you concluded, quote, Bostonians truly value their historic fabric. That is all Bostonians. That is not people necessarily who've just been focused on playing downtown. And I'm going to take issue with the idea of a transition zone. Right now, there's a hard shift from the east of Washington to the west of Washington, and it's what makes the character of the ladder block stand out. And this concept of a transition zone, I think is just your clever planning lingo, so you can justify destroying the historic fabric to drive the other agenda, which is development, which I respect, but I think there are other ways to accomplish that, as as Kim has laid out, in addition to several of the office to residential conversions that we've seen underway. I think this plan, is an attempt to clear a path for the developers who brazenly left their properties vacant and let them decay, and they sat idle, waiting years on end for the kind of gift that you're now handing them. And it's clear to me that and I think many others on this call, that you're out of touch with many of the constituent groups that produce the economic engines of growth here. The residents who pay property taxes. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention on that. Tourism and preservation organizations that draw millions of visitors to the city. And this area we're talking about is the epicenter of that. And small businesses that are drawn to this modest scale area, some of whom have been operating for decades here, others of whom would love to establish a presence if the landlords that you're now rewarding were asked to be more reasonable in engaging these small businesses. So in sum, I think this is an ill-fated plan. It's going in the wrong direction. It's going to take further conversation to get sorted out. You should absolutely extend the comment period at a minimum, but I think you should also reconvene the advisory group to consult on this, as well as give yourselves more time to consider the damage that you would inflict with these new draft recommendations in their current form. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Tony. Want to keep going and also be able to circle back to some people who have raised their hands. Again, Alexandra, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for hosting this tonight. I have 2 points. One is actually to echo some of the comments that Anthony had made when he explained, or he had suggested that some studies needed to be done, such as the transportation. The vast majority of the people who live downtown walk around, but when you try to get home anymore, it's very difficult with the way the city has repaved the lines, has condensed the lanes, and made room for the bikes, and et cetera, et cetera. So when you're going to put up all of these buildings, it wasn't clear to me, because I tried to read through all of that. What is the plan for parking as well? Because we have, like I stated, as a city person, we walk everywhere, but just to get home or just to drive to the grocery store and back is sometimes a big challenge. So I'm very curious to understand how you plan to tackle that, because what we've seen in the interim is with this sandwiching of these streets, we see these mopeds and motorcyclists jumping all over the place, and they cause chaos. And I don't know if you plan on doing something about that, or tackling that, or resolving that issue before you build all of these homes, where I'm presuming that a lot of these people are going to, at least somebody's going to have a car in one of these buildings. So they're going to be adding more traffic to the area. And like I stated, I would like to echo Anthony's position on that I think a traffic study should be presented to the people. My second question is, and if you could clarify for us, you mentioned multiple times for the Sky R zone that you wanted to expand the adult entertainment district. What do you mean by adult entertainment? Because we have currently the arts. I don't think that would be considered adult, because children all ages enjoy the arts. You have music, and all ages enjoy the music. So what do you mean when you state that you would like to expand that? And what exactly does that mean? Because for those of us, and I'm assuming that, you know, if you're having a building that's 500 feet and must have 60% residential use, you're going to have families in there. So I was very confused. And if you could clarify that for me, if you want this to be residential, why do you feel it's appropriate to add adult entertainment in a residential area? And if you could answer that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Just starting with the adult entertainment district to clarify, that's actually an existing district in place in the area that overlaps with the current Midtown Cultural District and the Chinatown Neighborhood District. We're not changing anything when it comes to the uses in place. Again, those are conditional, so they need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. We recognize that there are very few of those uses in place. That is why we are removing the boundary from the Chinatown Neighborhood District. But the district itself, the boundaries, the existing ones, have an odd overlap that don't align with any parcels. So the only change we're making is realigning those boundaries with existing parcels for clarity. So again, that's a existing district that's been in place that we were just taking the opportunity to remove from Chinatown and realign the boundaries.
Can I add something to that? Sorry about that, but if you are making this area more residential, right? Because you stated it was before it's mixed use, and now you want to make more housing for transit capacity, et cetera. Why would you not restrict that then? Because you want more people there versus, and I assume you want families and you want children there. So that's not clear to me. I understand that it may have existed, but if you look at Sky Low, it's forbidden. You have an F next to it. It's forbidden.
Yep.
So it shouldn't have to do with the height of a building. It has to do with the use of that building, which is residential. If it's residential, why do you want that there? And I thought that we were trying to build neighborhoods, families. Like if you listen to Mayor Yu on Instagram or on Twitter, she talks about family, family, family. So if that's the case, I'm just not clear on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and really goes back to sort of decades of evolution of downtown, starting with plans for the combat zone, right? Starting in Downtown Crossing, that over time, has continued to shrink as these uses have gone out of business and become significantly less prevalent in, right, all of our city's landscape. Right now, right, the only two extant adult entertainment uses in the city still exist in this adult entertainment zone. And we are required by a Supreme Court ruling to have adult entertainment be allowed somewhere within the city. So Boston's strategy has always been to limit that to a clear and defined district that also aligns with where those uses are present in the city, and to ensure that it is not expanded. So we think this is the best way to ensure we stay in compliance with the sort of federal case law that really regulates this rule. And again, to your point, is in no way an attempt to broaden this use, which we continue to see shrink and become less prevalent in the city.
And Alexandra, the other point I think you mentioned was related to traffic impact and traffic studies. And I think that goes back to what Kathleen was mentioning when it comes to Article 80 review process, in which a critical piece of that is looking at both the traffic impact of a project, but also impact on the public realm. Where does loading occur and where does curb cuts occur on a site-by-site basis, which is often critical to look site by site. and also look at the demands of a specific project. And that's our real mechanism to ensure that especially projects downtown are respecting the context, are mitigating impact to both the public realm, but also the traffic system. Robert, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So Andrew, I just want to follow up on your comment, one comment you made a few minutes ago, and then just probably pile on a little bit to what we heard from some others. I appreciate the fact that with this plan, this revised plan, some blocks actually did have, it sounds like maybe a decrease or move from one zone to another. But the fact is that with this, the zones that are defined here, this allows for building heights almost 3 times as high as what is allowed now. And that is a major change with a very significant impact on the people that live here. And I just want to make sure that the team that's put this together really truly hears that and hears the voices in this room and appreciates that. So I think the needs of the residents that are impacted by this proposal, I don't think that they're being adequately addressed, and it doesn't feel like they're being heard, particularly when a proposal that just came out, I don't know, what is it, a week or two ago, but we have until February something 5th to respond. So with pretty significant changes to what's being proposed here, with a pretty significant impact on the lives of the people that live there, it does feel like, to Kim's point, it does feel like disenfranchisement to say that, well, you've got until February 5th to comment, and then guess what? We're off to the races. So it just doesn't feel like your process is really designed to incorporate the input and the needs of the people that are most affected. So I applaud one of the objectives, and it sounds like it's a major objective of this, which is around housing. And I don't think anybody on this call would disagree about the need for housing in the city. I'd ask what kind of housing this proposal would foster and engender. Is it going to provide the kind of housing that's really needed, that's affordable, that's going to facilitate and foster a more diverse community, or is it going to foster development that is going to be high end, that turns out to be quite profitable for those who build the buildings, but really not designed to help the people that need the housing, and with a detrimental effect on the people that live here today. So I guess Tony and Kim and Anthony all have far more experience and perspective on this than I do, but I think that there's a lot to be heard and listened to from people who have been involved in this process for, it sounds like, years. And we have now a 3-week window to provide input on a tremendously impactful proposal. So I would just ask that you walk away from this conversation with an appreciation for that, and a commitment to slow down and incorporate the feedback, the earnest feedback that you're hearing on this call. Thank you.
Great. Robert, I just want to respond to one question you asked in there that I think was a new one. I want to be clear that all projects in this area, now that the city has passed inclusionary zoning, are required to provide at least 20% of units in their building as affordable to a range of affordable housing incomes. They have to average out 60%. It's a little different for home ownership projects. and also have to account set-asides for those that have public housing vouchers. So we are very excited as a planning department to have inclusionary zoning in place. It ensures that every project in the city is continuing the rich history that development downtown has of delivering affordable housing both in downtown and in nearby neighborhoods. Is going to continue to deliver that affordable housing, particularly on site in downtown. I think the other component of Plan Downtown is we also think more residents are necessary and needed downtown to help support the vitality of the streetscape, the small business environment, and help make sure we're really investing in downtown as a neighborhood for the future. That is one of the sort of goals that we're setting because of inclusionary zoning. All housing development downtown will include an affordable component and be mixed income, and that we think housing development is also a good and a use that is important to plan for here.
Great. Can I just really quickly respond, Kathleen? Thank you. And any affordable housing is a good thing. I guess the question is, how do we provide the housing affordable and not affordable? How do we do that? And it just seems that there are other ways, additional ways to approach that beyond what's being presented in this plan.
Thank you, Robert. Anne, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm gathering this information, new to this, but I've been in Boston in downtown Crossing for 5 years and a resident of the Boston area for 30 years. So I just want to understand this new plan was not supported by the advisory committee?
So to be clear, the zoning process does not have an advisory group. Plan Downtown planning initiatives do have an advisory group. There was one that consisted of a group from 2018 to 2023 that reviewed kind of all the policy recommendations from zoning to open space to transportation as part of that process. The zoning process does not. That's where we've had these ongoing public meetings.
So how many members are on the zoning or on this board that came up with this plan?
That consists of the planning team here.
How many is that?
So it consists of members from the zoning division as well as planning, myself, Kathleen, who's on the call.
Does anyone live in downtown Crossing?
Members that are part of the team have not, but we're responsible.
And did you get any input from any residents who approved this?
Andrew, if
Any
I could jump
residents who
in.
supported it?
Sure.
Hi, Anne. I'm Amy Chambers, Planning Director. So just for clarity, just kind of in a linear fashion. So Andrew was referring to the advisory group that worked on the plan itself. The plan was adopted last January. And reflective of a lot of the work that came out of both that body and an extensive community engagement process. The zoning that has been developed by staff and has had at this point several iterations, this being the most recent one, which we've opened up for public comment, is meant to be zoning that is implementing the plan itself, implementing the values named in the plan, and seeking to translate the things that have come out of the plan. Certainly understand that there is question that has been raised this evening from a number of folks about some of the things that are reflected in the plan as it relates as it relates to the plan, but it is standard practice for our teams to develop the plan with an advisory group, and on the back end of that, then develop zoning in response to the plan itself. And so I definitely understand your question with respect to who lives where, but the staff are doing the job of working to implement the plan, which has been adopted.
No one on the advisory committee has supported the plan?
The advisory committee did support the plan. The meeting that we're having is about, that's not about the plan. This is about the zoning, which is a separate deliverable. That's the distinction I'm seeking to make here.
Okay, so the new changes, no one on the advisory committee, doesn't sound like we're in favor. Also, there's a neighborhood association that I've gotten multiple letters from saying they're not supporting this. So I just wonder where the resident feedback is going. You've got 220 people on this call. And are you hearing?
Yes, so appreciate all the comments tonight, and the staff are here to both listen and to take in the comments themselves. I do want to just continue to make the distinction for everybody on the call between the kind of linear process that exists between the development of the plan, the passage of the plan, and then the development of the zoning in response to the plan itself. But I appreciate all the
Karos,
comments.
One more thought. Karos, I know you've been in this job, what did you say, 4 months? 3 months? Okay, you're giving us 14 days, business days, to submit our feedback. I think you need to give people a lot more time, and there's a lot more to consider. And I know there are 2 conversion developments going on. I don't know why the city isn't pushing more to make these beautiful buildings into condos, and why they're not incentivizing that instead of tearing them down and building high rises. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I can't see who you actually are, but Boston Preservation Alliance.
I promise I'll let you know.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and the rest of the staff who are on this important call. My name is Nicole Benjamin Ma, and I'm representing the Boston Preservation Alliance in my role as chair of the advocacy committee. I'll keep this brief, and I am going to try to avoid repeating in large part what others have so eloquently commented already, to allow as many people to talk as possible. That said, at the Alliance, we value our role as a resource, both for the city and our community neighbors. Naturally, the Alliance echoes several of the sentiments you've heard so far. Our former executive director and our board members sunk countless hours working with Plan Downtown, and it's disheartening to see this overshadowing of the efforts made to reach consensus in this rushed process. We strongly support the city's Office to Housing initiatives. We want to make that clear, and the development of Height in the midst of this housing crisis. We also applaud the design guidelines and the intensive process that led to new efforts like the context analysis. Many kudos to OHP, the Office of Historic Preservation, for all of their work on that in concert with BPDA and Boston Planning. With respect to the staff who have worked so hard over the years on the zoning, we need to hone in on the fact that facadism is not inherently preservation. It is a last resort. It is to be deployed selectively only after evaluation shows it is not feasible to keep a building. It's a plan Z, if you will. They should not be encouraged at the outset nor codified in zoning. Also, not all of our historic buildings and streetscapes are designated. You need to think holistically about the definition of historic beyond the legal definition, which don't always capture the non-tangible qualities of our built environment. We encourage extending this comment period and discussion, and the Alliance would be happy to discuss how to encourage the other forms of reuse that you guys have already brought up and to discourage facadism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also kind of thank you for reiterating or building off of some of the things we heard as well. Ryan, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to thank Tony, Anthony, Kim, Alexandra, and others, and I just want to echo their comments as well. I'm the general manager of the One Charles condominium, so I know heard a lot from us tonight. With all due respects, this plan was dropped on our laps less than a week ago. We've been scrambling for the past week to get the word out and to understand the implications and the long-term implications of this plan. And this short time period is a slap in the face. We have at least 30 people on this call from One Charles, and that's because we were able to get the word out There are so many others in neighboring communities that aren't even aware of this yet. We've done our best to get the word out to alert them of what's happening, but I'm sure that this now it's down to 187. It was up to 230. I guarantee that there would be 500 people on this call if you gave us a proper notice. So the fact that it was dropped a week ago, you're giving us 3 weeks to respond, not appropriate. I know that there's a lot of talk and we don't really necessarily know about the long-term infrastructure that this will impose, but we haven't done the appropriate models. We haven't done anything to know how it's going to affect the infrastructure, how it's going to affect transportation, how it's going to affect the parking, how it's going to affect trash, rodents. The Boston Common, I know that it's been spoken about, but the shadow laws, the historical landmarks, it's all going to have implications. So I think we really need to take a step back. We need to look at this from all standpoints and give the appropriate amount of notice for people to properly digest all this information, to make their formulations of their thoughts, their feelings, and how we should progress over the next 30 years. Thank you.
Well, I blew my top, but I think it was effective. People like what I had to say. I'll have to tell you later.
I'm still on.
Oh, just a minute.
Anthony will. Thanks, Ryan. I'm just gonna let Martha speak next and also try and respond to these comments. Want to just make sure we hear some and then we can respond to everyone. I know we're getting close to time, but we'll stay on to continue to listen. Martha, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm Martha McNamara. I am the chair of the Board of Revolutionary Spaces, and we are the stewards of two of Boston's, and I dare say the country's, most iconic 18th century American Revolutionary buildings, the Old State House and the Old South Meeting House, both of which fall in the planned downtown zone district. I just want to echo the shock that you're hearing about the introduction of Sky R into this zoning amendment. I have to respectfully disagree with Amy when she argued that this was implementing the plan that was approved. In my view, and I think in the view of many people on this call, there was never any indication that the zoning amendment would increase height this dramatically. When we were talking about Plan Downtown, and we've been talking about it, as they've said, for 6 years, I've been involved for 4 years, we were talking about 155 feet, except for one spot zone at Bromfield and Washington. And what we now have is a strip of 500 feet that runs through the center of this historic and vibrant downtown neighborhood. I also want to echo the dismay at the way that this is being pushed through and the way that it's completely disregarding public comment over the years that we've all been working on Plan Downtown. Again, I've been involved for about 4 years, and what this amendment tells me is that you have wasted my time. That what this amendment tells me is that you have not taken anything that we have said over these last years into account. Now, I've said this many times before in public meetings about Plan Downtown, probably 24 times, but I'll say it again now, and particularly for the benefit of Mr. Shen, since he hasn't been involved in Plan Downtown at all until about 3 months ago. Boston and the country's most iconic 18th century buildings are going to be dramatically impacted by this new zoning amendment, particularly the Sky R district. Most people think of Boston as a colonial era city, but in fact, there are only about a dozen 18th century buildings that survive in Boston, and over 1/3 of them are concentrated in the downtown neighborhood. and particularly in the neighborhood at the corner of Washington and Milk and School and State. Sky-R will not only seriously damage these buildings by increasing wind and driving rain into fragile 18th century historic buildings, but it will also make the downtown more inhospitable. Tall buildings cast shadows. They make pedestrian spaces dark and damp and windy and not places where people want to linger. Tourism is a huge engine for the economy of downtown. 3 million people walk the Freedom Trail every year, and they walk right through downtown. Those people will not linger in downtown if it's a canyon of towers. I'd also like to, again, as someone else said, I think it was Tony Pangaro, respectfully disagree with Andrew's characterization of Sky-R as a transition zone. There's nothing transitional about it. Sky-R does one thing and one thing only. It increases height. And while it's really important that we build more housing, the increase in height will not build the kind of housing we need. What it will build is more luxury condominium buildings. And that is not what the city needs. And I thought that's not what Mayor Wu wanted. I have a question for Andrew, and that is, I am just dumbstruck, but I think you pointed out something that I missed because I haven't had time to really look at the plan because I only got it a week ago. Am I to understand that the block of Milk and Water Street, which has a National Historic Landmark on it, the Old South Meeting House, is being upzoned from Sky Low to Sky? Why would you do that? I mean, it's bad enough that these historic buildings have tall buildings around them already. Why would you take away the minimum protection that Sky Low would have afforded that block? One last question. There's been incredible work done in the planning field over the last 20 to 30 years. Incredibly creative and innovative approaches to urban revitalization and placemaking. Why is Boston falling back on the unimaginative and failed approach of just allowing height? Boston is a hub of creativity and innovation. Why can't our planning be the same? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Martha. You have a lot of points in there. I want to keep hearing comments and then circle back. I'm keeping notes. One thing, though, the direct question about Milk and Water Street, the decision there was looking at, one, the fact that some of those key sites are designated landmarks with that designation assisting in their preservation and restricting any alteration. The other being the one other site there being established office building on site. So changing into the Sky District allows some consistency in terms of the other office building when it comes to uses and scale. But again, we'll try and circle back to some of these comments. I want to keep things moving. Karen, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Karen LaFrazier. I'm the president of St. Francis House in downtown Boston. And I have worked in downtown for nearly 30 years. I was part of the early planning process for Plan Downtown. And I would probably say there's probably not anybody on this call that is more concerned about the creation of housing. Having said that, I actually don't believe that this plan is going to bring in diversity of housing, even with all due respect with inclusionary zoning. When we look at the ranges of affordability, I don't think that that is going to, I'm not sure what happened, bring that about. I agree with actually everything everybody else has said. And Andrew, I just have, I guess I have a pointed question, which is, given everything you've heard from all of us tonight, why does it have to go in February? Is there a compelling reason that we can't work the zoning and allow for more conversation? I understand I understand that the plan was the result of a lot of us that worked on it, and that the zoning is a staff-led activity, but it doesn't mean that there can't be more conversation about where there are inconsistencies in the zoning with what the plan had envisioned. As I think you're hearing a lot of us say, and I don't understand why it has to go in February. Why it can't respect the wishes of everybody on this call to allow for more dialogue and conversation.
Can I jump in here? So I know that there's a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of concern about the timing. And I also recognize that this work has been going on for a long time. And there is no agreement, even though many of the speakers tonight echoed the same sentiments. We have received many other comments with opposing sentiments. So in my experience working in the city, which has now been over 30 years, even though I was not continuously in this, representing the city, I think that sometimes we feel like that extending is extending the time would lead to compromise between opposing viewpoints. And my feeling is that with the changes that we have made, we are offering a kind of compromise that we think is actionable. I appreciate that, many of the sentiments that have been shared actually, one of the things that we're balancing is also the economic reality of actually encouraging investment, not only new investment, as I mentioned at the beginning, but also reinvestment in these incredibly important historic structures. So I would say this, which is that I think I've been listening very carefully. I register your concerns about the timing, but I would also really ask ourselves whether we are turning a question about timing, about what we think is, getting the results that we might individually want to see. So I would say that I would like to keep on this timing because, the timesheet, the timeline that Andrew showed that the first draft of the zoning actually occurred more than a year and a half ago. And
Well,
I actually
wait a minute, Carlos.
No,
This is
no.
not the first draft of the zoning a year ago. This is the first draft 10 days ago.
No,
No,
the first
no.
draft of the zoning, the
But
original
the first draft
of
has no
zoning-
resemblance to what you produced on February 5th.
This is completely new, and frankly, the tone, Carlos, of what you just shared makes me question why are we even having this meeting?
Exactly. It's just designed to jam it through. You're not listening.
You're not hearing it.
You're not hearing us.
Carlos, let me take you to task once more. Forgive me. I've been at community participation for a long time. And an old device that the state often used to divide communities was to say, well, you're all saying something different, so we're smarter than the rest of you guys. We're going to make the choice. I think you're dissembling. 90% of the people who have commented about this don't like it. It's not 50-50. It's not 60-40. It's not 70-30. You're listening to a few people who are going to gain a windfall by developing their property and not even build affordable housing. They're going to build condominiums for the very rich. It's a windfall for them. It's a loss for everybody else. And you're wrecking the fabric of downtown. And your excuse is some people want that, so you guys don't represent the majority. Please don't do that. What you ought to be doing is convening a group of people who could talk to one another without you intermediating and telling us what the other party thinks. It's not right. It's not done. and it stopped the highway because people understood that they wouldn't be fooled and used that way. And to dissemble, Amy, about the difference between an advisory group for zoning, which has been commenting on zoning for 4 years, and tell us that now that's a different idea, a different group, something that we can't comment on because zoning is your department, not ours. Why did you show it to us 4 years ago? Why did you show it to us back in June?
Tony, I just want to clarify that I'm not suggesting that anybody can't comment on that. And for the matter of the record, I want to make sure that there's clarity there.
Well,
I-
if you mean that, Amy, you should give us time to comment on what you just produced, not rush it to the board in a few weeks after you've given us 3 weeks to discuss something that will have a 25-year impact. It's just not reasonable, it's not professional, and it's not fair.
And
And
allow.
it's not what Mayor Wu promised us when
Excuse me.
we voted for her.
That's right. Mayor Wu has promised to stay involved and she's not here right now. So this needs to stop until she gets back in office.
May I suggest that we allow some of the people who have raised their hands to speak, continue to speak, and I am committed to hearing everyone that is, has comments tonight. Andrew?
Yes, Chris, please go ahead.
Everybody, how are you? This is you hear me? This is Chris Jamison calling. I've been a resident at Millennium and now Winthrop since 2016. We have a handful of restaurants in the downtown area. We own and operate Yvonne's over at on Winter Place. We own and operate Ruka and the Godfrey Hotel. We have Mariel down the street in the financial district. And I remember, I mean, I think I've been on these calls. We're probably going on about 10 years now about this property. When I walk through the neighborhood every day, we have hundreds of employees that walk through the neighborhood every day. And, one of the things that it just kind of keeps running through my head on this is we've spent so much time talking about what this block is going to look like, up against the sky and how high it's going to be or what it's going to do to the skyline or shadows. And I've always just been focused on what it would do to the street level. And to me, it feels like these conversations continuously get hijacked talking about sort of elevations and heights and all of these other view corridors and things like that. But we've seen the ground level of downtown Crossing continue to deteriorate for years. I mean, everybody sees the headlines, everybody watches the news. I think there was progress pre-COVID. I think COVID set this neighborhood back a lot, and I don't think it's ever gotten to where it was in 2019. For me, living here, I'm not going anywhere. I own over here. We've got businesses that will be here for another 10 years. This is a place that I'm going to walk through 5 times a week for the duration of my tenure in Boston. I just keep walking past that block and wondering why we're letting these ideas sort of languish in 3, 4, 5 different iterations of this building. And it just seems to me that the appetite to put anything there is zero. It doesn't even matter what it is. It's just it's nobody wants development on that block. Nobody wants anything there. And we're looking at these dark windows, these dark storefronts, and it's a huge blight on this neighborhood. There's been so much tasteful development. There's been so much progress down here. Every north, south, east, west of that block is improving, and that block is just a dark spot in this whole neighborhood. So. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you. I mean, it seems like anything that's proposed is opposed. I would love to see something happen there because it's just this neighborhood is not improving. We're seeing it every day. We're seeing it on the street. Let's get our heads out of the clouds here and start looking at the street level and try and figure out how to make this big part of this neighborhood better. I've seen some great ideas over the years. I've seen some great proposals, some beautiful buildings. And obviously that changes as the economy changes. So, what's being proposed today seems like it works with what's proposed today. If we kick this thing another 2 years and we're on this same Zoom in 2 years, it's going to be something else, but nobody's going to want it. I hope we can get this over the finish line some way, somehow, and improve that corner because that corner is sad. I would support this. I fully support this. I hope we can get this thing done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and it looks like we have 5 more raised hands. So I just want to keep it at that for now, and ensure that we, get a chance to hear from them and circle back as needed. Ellen, I think you're next.
Thanks. I don't know where to start, and I think you'd have 150 more hands if people had a chance to digest this. Alexa said, dig into the design guidelines. There's no time to dig in. There's no time to build consensus. This really does fly in the face of people, both on staff and on the advisory board and people coming to meetings who've spent 6 years. It just undoes what people have agreed on. And I think a lot of people are saying there hasn't been agreement on some of the things like treatment of historic buildings. That's both sides of Washington Street. I'm on the board of Revolutionary Spaces, and what you're saying about Old South and building, I assume you mean over the Old South office building. You can't preserve buildings if they're in a canyon, if they're in the dark, if people can't see them to get to them. It's not a landmark if you can't see it. For all the time that I think Nat Shiley, the president of Revolutionary Spaces, and Martha have been participating, there's been a request to make Upper Washington Street, both sides, a character district, because as Beatrice said, as Nicole said, as others have said, it's a fairly homogeneous district of mid-rise buildings, of buildings that can be rehabilitated. And to echo what's been said before, preserving facades is not historic preservation, except maybe, as Nicole said, as Plan Z, and we're nowhere near it. I think there's no place more downtown Boston than the northern part of the spine of Washington Street. It has residential. It's been hit hard by COVID, but I don't think we should abandon mid-rise buildings for conversions, for more retail, for more restaurants, for real historic preservation. And I'll stop there. Thank you. And hi, Kairos.
Thank you, Ellen. Rishi, please go ahead.
Hey all, Andrew, thanks for organizing. I've been one of the original members of the advisory group when Plan Downtown was constructed back in 2018. For those who haven't met, I'm the head of the Downtown Boston Neighborhood Association, along with a few others. And we hear from a lot of different voices, both residents, businesses, business owners, and there's, we try our best to convene meetings and forums for discussion, debate, to truly pull out the best opinions and ideas that we can from our community. When we started this meeting, Kairos, we haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. You put down the stake in the ground, which was you have until February 4th to comment, and we're hell-bent on making sure that that date is met. I don't understand the rationale for it. I think Karen from St. Francis has asked the same question. You've heard it in the chat as well. This adamant approach to timeline is, number one, frankly unnecessary, and it's a turnoff to the majority of us who served on the AG for 6+ years. And in the past 24 hours, I can't tell you the number of emails, texts, and phone calls I received from folks saying, what is going on here? Who's driving this? What is the agenda? And I don't have good answers, Kairos. And that's not a good look for any of us. I would like for nothing more than for our elected officials and their appointees to succeed in their work. I've been a Bostonian for 25 plus years. I live in downtown with my young family. I've got a pet here. I care about the future of the neighborhood. I have no agenda. I'm a volunteer on every single thing that I do here, right? So this isn't some sort of an agenda that I'm trying to push as a one-off here in downtown. I'm simply trying to elevate, for your benefit, the voices of folks that we hear from day in and day out, right? I'm also on the board of St. Francis House. I'm on the board of the Downtown Business Alliance. I work in healthcare private equity. I care about business. I care about the residential interest. When we started this meeting, we noted that our aspiration for the neighborhood, Kairos, I don't know who our is. This is not the aspiration of those of us who live here. So our being a body that is yet to be defined, I'd love to hear who our aspiration truly is. I mean, this is not what a public process should look like after 6 years. And Amy, I agree with you. I mean, look, I understand that the planning versus zoning are two separate and distinct things, and that we've served our purpose as an advisory group. But I would say this, had the plan that we, the advisory group, had come up with, had that plan actually looked somewhat similar to what we're seeing tonight, you probably wouldn't have as much pushback, and you probably wouldn't have 230 people on a call on a Tuesday evening in January. But the reality is, it's such a divergent outcome that I almost wonder, why are we calling it Plan Downtown? It's a different product. There are elements that, sure, they still resemble what the advisory group had contemplated, but frankly, it's a different beast. And for us to sit here and pretend that this is a product that the advisory group has stamped and is pleased with, and that 100% of folks are on board with, I can tell you for a fact that over 75% of the folks who served in the advisory group have been in touch in the last 24 to 48 hours. And this does not enjoy the broad support of that group. These are experts in the fields of preservation and character of neighborhoods and economic development and planning. They understand the intricacies of Boston. It's not just a hodgepodge of people who came together, 20 people over the course of 6 years. So my strong suggestion, Kairos, a few things I'd suggest. One, extend the comment period. That's an easy thing. I'm not saying extend it by a year or 2 years or 3 years. Give it 30 more days. Have a proper approach to actually collecting genuine feedback from the community that you'll genuinely listen to. To come out at the start of a meeting and saying we're going to insist on a certain set of dates and timelines, and that we have our own preconceived notions of what this needs to be, is frankly, it's a turnoff, right? And you're hearing that loud and clear from folks on this call. So number one, extend the comment period. Number two, have a proper, genuine approach to community engagement on this process. That has not happened. It just hasn't, right? I've received 0 phone calls or inbound or anything from the city's planning department, former BPDA folks about this, right? We have over 1,000 members that we represent. 0, not one interaction about this. And here we are tonight. So it's a surprise to a lot of people. And that's why you're hearing, I think, some of the tension that you are tonight. Number 3, the Chinatown rezoning process, which we haven't talked about tonight, was a carve out from Plan Downtown. And that meeting is happening at 6 p.m. this evening as well, right? So I have folks from Chinatown reaching out to me and saying, what is going on here? Why are we scheduling meetings about things that are related, our abutting neighborhoods, which share character, roadways, arteries, issues? We're convening meetings at the same time and disallowing people to participate. And by the way, there are multiple members from Chinatown who served on the advisory group as well, as you know. And so we shouldn't be doing that as a third suggestion. And lastly, what I'd say is, if you truly want to respect the will of the people who elected this administration into office, you need to listen to them. I've attended, I can't tell you how many meetings in the last 45 days about public safety, about transportation, and now zoning, where the resounding feedback has been, there seems to be an insistence of late that we need to disengage the community. We need to turn off the feedback mechanisms. We need to go into the shadows and come up with our own plans and then present them. And you're hearing that across the board. Transportation, I was at a meeting in South Boston last night with over 90 people, all civic leaders, and 100% of attendees said, why is it that it is so hard to give this city feedback and for it to listen to it? And that everything is a struggle, it seems. And it shouldn't be this way. I think for all of us who are volunteering our time and energy and expertise, we're simply asking for a fair shake here. We're not looking to prolong a process for the sake of prolonging something. It's let's get to a good outcome that's good for residents, good for business, and that are sensible things that are going to last 40, 50 years. and many of us who have been involved know this, 1989 was the last time we've had a meaningful update to master planning around this area, the Midtown cultural district plan that was put out there in 1989. And so people are very excited about what this could do for economic development, for residential growth, for affordable housing. But if you disregard the community piece and the residential feedback, and you disregard the realities of infrastructure, transportation, if you want to throw more bike lanes and bus lanes and do things around the city, fine. But realize that there are consequences, right? We don't have residential permit parking in downtown. You want affordable housing here, guess what? You're going to pay $300, $400 per month as a resident to put your car in a garage. That's the reality. Or you pay $120,000 to buy a spot. That's not affordable. And so there are just certain realities you need to grapple with. And part of the frustration that I hear from residents and businesses, by the way, day in and day out, is everything is disjointed, right? We talk about planning in Exhibit A, and in Exhibit B, we talk about public safety as though it doesn't impact life in real estate development or life on the ground. You're not going to have any ground floor activation if public safety is not solved, and if transportation isn't solved, and the mopeds and the bikers and all of the other issues we're talking about aren't solved. So this is all interrelated, and to have 14 business days to comment on a plan that's going to impact 50 years going forward in this neighborhood, it's just not appropriate. And so what I say to you is I would listen hard and loudly to what people are saying, and I wouldn't be so adamant about sticking to an artificial timeline that is not going to serve any interest well. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi. You brought up a lot of points. I just want to say, given the time and looking at our cutoff point that I said before, just going to let Michael speak, and anyone else who has questions or comments, please reach out. Also drop questions in the chat that we can speak to later.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll be brief. Excuse me. I'm Michael Nichols. I'm on the advisory group. I represent the Downtown Boston Alliance. And we do want to offer our support for the framework of the plan downtown as presented. While we're working to evaluate the details in each of the changes that were presented this round, we will offer a letter in the weeks ahead, and we are largely in support of the thoughtful and ambitious nature of this plan and the proposed changes, which do seem to align with the broadly held goals of Plan Downtown, support downtown's continued evolution, and take seriously the housing crisis that we face in the city. Chris Jamieson spoke incredibly well a moment ago about this downtown. It can't stand still. It can't be stuck in a moment in time. Its residents of today should be wary of slamming the door shut to others having a similar opportunity. We have an opportunity to build, grow, renew, preserve simultaneously, and we should continue to try to do so while getting the details right. We've heard much enthusiasm about Plan Downtown throughout this, 7-year process? And recently from those who work here, who spend 3, 4, 5 days a week here, the businesses that depend on the dependable foot traffic that comes with a broader residential community mixed with using the parcels and properties that are ripe for development today. We believe in many ways this is a sensible plan that we look forward to engaging on the details in the weeks ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Andrew, I just wanted to jump in very quickly to Rishi's comment about the Chinatown meeting that's tonight. That meeting is an office hours meeting. The Chinatown draft has been released as well. And we are hosting that meeting in particular. It kind of became more of a meeting for business owners on account of added opportunity for comment on the Chinatown draft. We'll also be having an in-person session of the same sort on Saturday. And we'll be hosting weekly office hours on the Chinatown draft as well through the course of the month. So, I understand the concern about there being a meeting at the same time tonight, but it is something that we have, had planned for and will repeat several times over the next several weeks.
Thanks, Amy. And I think one thing I really want to close out with is, reinforcing the things that are changing in this draft, things to, focus on as part of everyone's review. I'll bring up the example of the map really quickly. And I want to just re-emphasize that a lot of elements are staying the same in comparison to the draft that was released in April of last year. The key areas that are changing are highlighted here. One being the area that Sky Low is actually expanding. And I think one key area being the zone where height is being elevated for residential buildings, in which, you know, state shadow law regulations will actually limit below that 500 feet a lot of the properties in this in-between zone. And so this really results in about four blocks of, you know, key sites along Washington Street, next to key transit access, key opportunities to revitalize downtown crossing for residential growth. And so this is, you know, that, you know, key area that is changing between the two drafts. The other is these zones that are actually a down zone from the draft that was released last year. So what's changing in these areas is heights that went up to shadow limit and FAA are being reduced to prioritize residential. So I want to really ensure people are keeping these changes in mind, these being kind of the essential changes in mind as they look at the draft. And then when it comes to comment, I think design guidelines were brought up, and these updated design guidelines were released last July. There was a public comment for them and a public meeting for them as well. We received
the guy with
about
the little chin beard who's sort of the
sorry, please everyone try and mute yourselves. We'll close out really soon. But we did receive about 50 or so comments back for the public comment period on the design guidelines. Most of them responded in opposition to height at the Brownfield site. They were not in response to the guidelines themselves. So we would really value this as an opportunity to hear feedback on the guidelines, not on specific development sites, and hope this is an opportunity to, you know, focus on, you know, as outlined online in the summary of changes, you know, the tweak that has been made, the focus sites that have been outlined in the new draft. I hope that provides a little bit more context. I do want to, you know, open the floor to Kairos as well to give any closing remarks. But thank you so much for all your time and staying late with us.
Thank you, Andrew. I just want to take a minute to thank everybody for attending tonight's meeting. I appreciate all of the comments that were given, and I know that, you know, that there's lots of work that people have invested. I appreciate that, you know, that there's been a lot of concern about some of the changes and, you know, whether you will have enough time to actually review them. So I've registered them. I think me being here tonight is representative of how serious we are taking the issues that have been raised. I want to make sure that you know that when the mayor appointed me, she asked that I put this as a top priority for me to actually help bring the staff together to get to where we are. So I just want to make sure that you know that this is, you know, it has my attention and the staff's attention. I also want to thank the staff who have been working on this for many years. So there's a lot of continuity of thought, and that I know that some people have suggested that, you know, I have inserted myself to impose a particular viewpoint. I would like to tell you that I depend very much on the expertise and professionalism of the staff. I have tried to work with them to actually, you know, get this work to the place that it is today. So I'm not doing this without, you know, their good work. And again, I want to thank all of you who've been here tonight. And I hope to see you soon. For those of you, I know that the Chinatown zoning question has been raised about the conflict in time. I want you to know that I will be attending the in-person meeting this Saturday. So for those of you who are able and would like to say hello in person, I'll be delighted to meet you in person on Saturday at 2. I plan to be there at 2 o'clock, and I think the meeting starts at 1. So Chinatown zoning, downtown zoning is on my very much top of mind for me. So I hope that you know, I don't know, some of you will be reassured by that, but I hope that you know that I care very much. And I want to make sure that we do the best job that we can. So thank you again. And hope, as I said, I hope to meet and you guys, many of you in person, and at least be able to say hello. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And good night.